My name is Sira Kine. I was 11 years old when the sky over my grandfather's farm turned a color no sky should ever turn. He did not explain. He simply grabbed me and ran. That single afternoon was how the Varith ascendancy introduced itself to humanity, not with a greeting, with fire. 20 years of war followed that afternoon. We lost cities. We lost fleets. We lost names I still whisper to myself when the room goes quiet. The ascendancy had swallowed hundreds of worlds before they ever noticed ours existed. To them, we were a small problem waiting to be erased and forgotten. Their historians had a phrase for species like us, a footnote species, something you conquer on the way to somewhere important and never think about again. We were never supposed to last this long. We lasted anyway, not because we were stronger, not because our weapons were better at the start. In the early years, our ships burned faster than we could build them and our cities fell faster than we could evacuate them. We lasted because something in a human refuses to stay down. We adapt. We learn. We climb back up until the thing that knocked us over begins to wonder if it made an error. I grew up inside that climb. I trained inside it. I buried friends inside it. By the time I held any real rank, the war was no longer a story someone told me. It was simply the shape of my entire life. By year 10, the ascendancy stopped calling us primitive. By year 15, they stopped striking our core worlds directly. By year 20, something happened that had never once happened in 400 years of their recorded history. A Varith fleet pulled back from a battle without finishing it. That retreat is the reason I am telling you this story now. The message arrived on a gray morning. My aide Nadia stepped into my office without knocking. Nadia never forgot to knock. She set a data slate on my desk and told me I needed to see it immediately. The header was Varith, official channel, verified codes. The kind of transmission our intelligence division had waited 2 decades to receive and had almost stopped believing would ever come. The ascendancy was requesting a peace summit. I read it 3 times before I let the words settle. It proposed a ceasefire. It proposed a meeting aboard a new station called Meridian in a stretch of space both sides had bled for. It asked that our delegation be led by someone with proven authority in matters of war. I understood exactly what that meant. They did not want a diplomat. They wanted someone who had fought them and beaten them. They wanted me. I should have felt honored. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach. The same feeling I used to get before a battle when everything looks calm and you know it will not stay that way. Nadia told me command was split. Some believed the ascendancy was finally exhausted and losing ground on 3 fronts. Others believed it was exactly what it looked like. A trap. I told her both things could be true at once. A wounded animal is often at its most dangerous rather than its most honest. That afternoon, the Joint Council gathered. Half the officers in the room had lost someone to this war, and none of them trusted a sudden offer of peace. An analyst named Dr. Solon stood at the front pointing to a rotating diagram of Meridian Station. He noted that the docking bays were far larger than any diplomatic shuttle would require. He noted that the station's defense grid was fully active. Neutral ground rarely needs weapons. I studied the schematic and said what everyone in that room was already thinking. They are inviting us into a box and calling it an open door. General Marrow argued we should refuse outright. His arms stayed crossed over his chest the entire time he spoke. He said we should not walk directly into an obvious trap simply because it arrived wrapped in polite language. I told him with respect that I did not believe refusing was the right choice either. The room went quiet at that. Marrow raised an eyebrow and waited for me to explain myself. If we refused, I continued the ascendancy would tell every world watching that humanity was offered peace and chose war instead. That story would spread whether it was true or not, and it would cost us allies we could not afford to lose. If we accepted and prepared properly, we would control how the moment unfolded instead of letting them control it. Marrow asked what would happen if it truly was a trap. I met his eyes without flinching and told him then we would make certain the trap cost them far more than it cost us. A long silence followed. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. the same calculation running through my own mind. Every war carries moments like this one. Moments where the safe choice and the right choice are simply not the same thing. Ambassador Solis made the final call. I would lead the delegation. We would not go unprepared. If the Ascendancy wanted to test whether humanity had grown oft after 20 years of grinding war, they were about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. Over the following days, we built something the Ascendancy could never anticipate. We could not simply arm a diplomatic ship. If their sensors caught weapons on approach, the entire summit would collapse before it began. So we built something quieter. A device drawn from Varith technology captured years earlier from a downed vessel. Our engineers had spent a decade studying its disruption emitter and had turned a narrow communication jammer into something far more useful. A short-range field capable of scrambling enemy weapons shields and propulsion for roughly 90 seconds. Not a weapon, a window. 90 seconds to reposition and change the entire shape of a dangerous moment before it became something none of us could walk away from. Our chief engineer walked me through the device personally 3 weeks before departure. He knelt near a section of decking that looked like ordinary storage space and pressed a sequence of panels until the floor slid open silently, revealing a narrow stairway. He explained that the entire lower level had been built using a layered shielding technique adapted from the same captured Varith technology, and that it took his team nearly 8 months to get the readings clean enough to fool any external sweep. He pulled a gray tarp away from the device with quiet pride and told me approximately 90 seconds was the true window. After that, their systems would begin recovering faster the further you moved from the epicenter. 90 seconds did not sound like much stated out loud in a quiet room, but I had spent enough years in combat to know exactly how much could happen in 90 seconds when the right people used them well. I also requested a small hidden unit, not soldiers built for open battlefield combat, but a quieter kind of team trained for close spaces and split-second decisions. Captain Vale Rourke led them. I had served beside her during some of the war's hardest campaigns. She was not a large woman, and she rarely raised her voice. There was a stillness in her that made people trust her instantly in dangerous rooms. She had a gift for staying calm exactly when everyone around her began to panic. When our team gathered on the lower deck for the first time, she greeted me with a firm handshake and said she heard we were attending a peace summit. I told her that was the official story. Unofficially, I said we were attending a peace summit while being fully prepared for the possibility that it was not one. She smiled the kind of smile that held no humor in it, only readiness. She said that sounded like most of the missions we had done together. I told her I hoped this one would be different. I hoped to walk away from Meridian having accomplished nothing more exciting than a long, boring negotiation. She said she would drink to that outcome, but would keep her team ready for the other one anyway. I appreciated her honesty more than she probably realized. There is a particular comfort in working beside people who do not pretend the danger away. Our ship was named the Quiet Accord. On the surface, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be. An unarmed diplomatic vessel carrying a small delegation toward a summit that might end the longest war humanity had ever fought. Underneath that surface, hidden behind false walls, it carried something else entirely. A concealed lower deck built with layered shielding that read to any scan as solid structural support. It took our engineers 8 months to get that shielding right. Down there sat gear for 5 soldiers, a small medical bay, a secondary communication array, and the disruption device itself resting under a gray tarp. The night before departure, Dr. Solon came to me with something that had been bothering him for 3 days. He had gone through the treaty sentence by sentence like a jeweler checking a gem for hidden cracks. He showed me the section on troop presence. The Ascendancy agreed to limit their escort to a standard diplomatic guard, but nowhere did the document define what that meant. No numbers, no ship classes, no weapon limits. A real treaty protects both sides by making every term specific. This one was full of soft language that promised nothing at all. Either their negotiators were inexperienced, or they built the document this way on purpose, so they could claim they never broke a single rule no matter what they brought to that station. I frowned at the page and told him that seemed like a strange thing to leave out of a peace treaty. He said it was not strange. It was deliberate. A real treaty should protect both sides by making every term specific and measurable. This document was instead full of soft language, reasonable measures, appropriate presence, standard escort, words that sounded official but promised nothing at all. I said slowly that either their negotiators were inexperienced or they had written it this W. I on purpose so they could claim they never broke a single rule no matter what they brought to that station. He agreed and told me that, knowing the ascendancy, he did not believe for one moment their negotiators were inexperienced. He slid one more page toward me. A partial translation of intercepted Vareth traffic pulled from a border listening post 2 weeks earlier. Fragmented and unconfirmed, but one phrase repeated 3 separate times across different transmissions. Gather the wolves at the threshold. A slow, quiet chill moved through me. Meridian was the name of the station. Wolves in every translation we had ever gathered was a term the Ascendancy used specifically for combat vessels prepared for a decisive strike. They were massing warships near the summit site. Solon asked me honestly whether I believed any part of this was genuine. I told him the truth rather than something comforting. I believed some part of their leadership likely did want the war to end. Wars like this rarely end because one side becomes kind. They end because continuing to fight becomes more costly than stopping. But wanting peace and planning treachery are not opposite things inside the same government. Empires like the Ascendancy are not one mind. They are many factions fighting for control of the same decisions. One faction may have sent us a genuine offer, while another quietly worked to make sure that offer never survived its first meeting. 7 of us understood the full truth of our mission, beyond the cover story given to the wider fleet. Nadia would serve at my side during negotiations as always. Dr. Solon would continue his analysis even as we traveled. Vale Rourke and 4 soldiers would remain hidden below deck until the moment they were needed, if that moment ever came. We spent our final hours reviewing hidden compartments, signal phrases, escape routes, and fallback positions. It felt strange preparing so carefully for violence while also preparing genuine terms we hoped to discuss if the Ascendancy truly meant what they had written. I found myself hoping quietly that all of it would prove unnecessary. But hope, I had learned long ago, is not a plan. It is simply the thing you carry while you build the plan that actually protects you. Meridian Station appeared on our sensors 2 days into the journey. A series of connected rings surrounding a central spire slowly rotating against the black. Small lights marked docking point sensor arrays, and what I suspected were defense systems disguised as ordinary infrastructure. Nadia called it beautiful. I agreed and reminded her that beautiful things can still hide danger. Sometimes danger hides best inside beauty, precisely because people struggle to imagine something so impressive concealing something so ugly. We docked without incident in the outer ring exactly where the treaty specified. As we drew closer, I noticed other vessels already docked along the rings. Some civilian in nature, likely observers from smaller allied species. Others carried the unmistakable angular design of Vareth military craft in numbers that felt higher than any simple diplomatic escort would require. I said nothing aloud, but I filed it away. Ambassador Kesh met us at the airlock with a floating translator drone hovering beside him. He was tall with smooth gray skin and eyes that shifted subtly in tone depending on the lighting around him. He welcomed us to Meridian Station and called our arrival an honor. Something in that warmth struck me immediately as unusual. In 20 years of war, I had encountered exactly 0 moments of genuine warmth from a Vareth official. He led us deeper into the station, and I let myself study our surroundings, carefully cataloging details, the way years of training had taught me to do almost without conscious thought. The corridor branched into more paths than a station built solely around one meeting hall would ever need. Small alcoves along the walls held statues placed at clear sight lines down every corridor. 4 guards stood at rigid attention at the first junction we passed. Their posture carried the unmistakable discipline of trained soldiers, rather than simple ceremonial guards. He asked whether something was troubling me, and I told him I was simply taking in the impressive scale of his station. He explained that Meridian had been built specifically for this summit to provide a location worthy of such an important moment in the history of both our peoples. Through a wide viewing window, I counted 6 Varith vessels visible from that single angle alone, more than double what a controlled negotiation would ever require. He noticed my gaze and offered an explanation before I even asked, additional protective measures for the sensitive nature of the talks. I told him security was a reasonable precaution for both our peoples given the circumstances. He seemed genuinely pleased by the answer. I said nothing further on the matter, though internally I filed away every detail of his explanation, alongside everything Dr. Solon had already uncovered. That evening, Dr. Solon swept our quarters for surveillance and found nothing his equipment could detect. Nadia asked whether I had counted the same 6 ships she had. I told her I doubted that window had shown us the full number. We agreed to attend the opening session exactly as planned. Remain polite. Remain patient. Keep watching for whatever proof would finally reveal their true intentions. Morning arrived without a sunrise. Only the soft brightening of corridor lighting marking a new day. Kesh greeted us on schedule and led us to the negotiation hall, where a long curved table waited beneath a wide window. We spent hours moving through ceasefire terms and prisoner exchange frameworks. Kesh offered concessions that on the surface seemed genuinely meaningful, and despite every warning sign, I felt a small cautious hope settle into my chest. That hope lasted until midday, when Kesh excused himself to consult privately with his advisors. During the recess, Nadia approached me quietly. Our communications officer Corin had picked up something on a secondary channel and needed me back aboard the ship immediately, using the excuse of checking delegation supplies. Corin met us at the comm station with a recording pulled from an older unencrypted frequency band, the ascendancy used historically for close formation coordination between vessels. The translation was rough, but the core came through with disturbing clarity. Multiple ships confirming positions along a coordinated perimeter around the station. A separate voice instructing all assigned vessels to hold position and wait for what the software rendered roughly as the signal moment. They were positioning a full blockade around Meridian Station. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle. Every piece we had gathered converged now into one undeniable shape. This summit was never truly built around ending the war. It was built around the appearance of peace, specifically to gather humanity's most valuable leadership into one contained location, surrounded quietly by overwhelming force waiting only for the right moment to close completely. Dr. Solon considered our options carefully once we had all gathered aboard the Quiet Accord. Confronting Kesh directly and presenting this evidence risked revealing exactly how much we already knew before we fully understood their complete plan or timeline. Confronting them now might force their hand earlier than they intended, before we had gathered everything needed to protect ourselves properly. Nadia asked what the second choice looked like. I told her we would continue exactly as we had been. We would return to the negotiation table. We would remain calm, patient, and outwardly unaware of what we had discovered. We would allow their plan to keep unfolding naturally, while we quietly prepared our own response, ready to act the precise moment their true intentions became undeniable. Solon pointed out how much more dangerous that path truly was. It meant walking directly back into that room, sitting across from Kesh, knowing everything we now knew without revealing a single flicker of it through our expression or our words. I agreed it was dangerous, but it also gave us the advantage of controlling the moment. This confrontation truly began, rather than allowing the ascendancy to control it entirely. If we revealed our knowledge now, we lost whatever element of surprise we still held. If we waited, watching carefully for the true signal of their plan, we chose exactly when and how this moment unfolded. 2 paths sat in front of us. I chose the second one. I went below deck and found Vale Rourke already alert, having sensed the shift in mood before I arrived to confirm it. I told her I believed the Ascendancy intended to act within the next day. I wanted her team ready to move the instant I gave the signal phrase, and not 1 second before, regardless of what happened at the table. She promised her team would hold until I gave the word. We returned to the hall the following morning and requested an early session, citing eagerness to finalize terms. Kesh welcomed the request warmly, unaware that anything had changed. 40 minutes into the session, Corin's voice reached my earpiece, reporting power fluctuations across multiple Vareth vessels surrounding the station. Their weapon systems were charging. Minutes later, he reported additional guards repositioning near every exit we had identified on arrival. The moment had begun. I caught Nadia's eye for a fraction of a second. She gave the smallest nod in return. I waited for a natural pause in the conversation and then spoke calmly. I told Ambassador Kesh that before we continued, I wished to discuss the current fleet positions surrounding this station. Something cracked across his careful expression for the first time since our arrival. I told him we both understood this summit had never truly been about the terms. We spent 2 days discussing. His advisors shifted uncomfortably and glanced toward the exits. I told him I believed he understood the phrase "gather the wolves at the threshold" perfectly well. The chamber fell silent. His mask finally slipped, revealing something colder and far more familiar underneath. I spoke the simple signal phrase I had chosen weeks earlier for its ordinary sound. Within moments, alarms began sounding softly through hidden speakers. Vale's team moved exactly as rehearsed, using our disruption technology to knock the station's primary security network, and nearby weapon placements completely unresponsive within seconds. Kesh's advisors reached for concealed communication devices and found nothing but static. Kesh rose quickly, demanding to know what I had done. I told him I had simply done what his own people taught me to expect. They built a beautiful door and called it an invitation. We made certain we were never standing on the wrong side of it. Outside the station, our own fleet, hidden at the edge of the system for 2 days, emerged from concealed positions. The instant they received our signal, moving to intercept the confusion now spreading through the Ascendancy blockade. 3 members of Vale's team had positioned themselves earlier that morning, near the station's central security hub, disguised as ordinary delegation support staff, carrying equipment cases through the corridors. The moment my signal reached them through their hidden earpieces, they moved with calm, practiced efficiency, using the same disabling technology our engineer had shown me weeks earlier. Within seconds, the station's primary security network, along with several nearby weapon placements, found their systems completely unresponsive, caught inside the exact window our engineers had built for precisely this purpose. Their approach relied on precision rather than aggression, using equipment designed to temporarily incapacitate rather than cause lasting harm. Our goal was control of the situation, and not needless conflict with soldiers who were, in most cases, simply following orders from commanders far above them. Within 20 minutes, Vale reported the station fully secured with minimal resistance. Several Vareth security personnel, finding themselves suddenly isolated and unable to reach their command structure, simply chose to stand down rather than continue resisting a situation that had clearly moved beyond anything they had prepared for. I felt real relief at those words. Our goal had never been unnecessary conflict, only careful, controlled response to whatever had been planned against us. Outside the station, our own fleet focused primarily on disabling key vessels within the blockade, rather than pursuing aggressive engagement, using tactics refined over 20 years of hard experience, fighting exactly this kind of overwhelming force. I told Kesh his station now belonged to considerably calmer hands than originally intended. He studied the table between us in silence before asking what happened now. I told him we would finish the conversation he originally invited us here to have. This time honestly, without hidden fleets, without disabled communication devices, and without any further pretense about the true purpose of this summit. The relief did not last long. Corin's voice returned urgently within the hour. A second fleet had emerged from a concealed position roughly 40 minutes earlier, moving directly toward the system. Considerably larger than the blockade we had already disrupted. Dr. Solon believed the blockade had never been the true weapon. Only a formation meant to hold the station secure until a larger force arrived to finish the plan. Our current strength combined with the station's now secured defenses would face serious difficulty against a fleet of that scale through direct confrontation alone. I asked Solon how thoroughly Fleet Command had been tracking Varith movements before our departure. He told me Command had grown suspicious of this summit weeks earlier and had authorized extensive reconnaissance throughout the entire region. Something began forming clearly in my mind. I had Corin open a secure channel to Admiral Dre, commanding our support fleet stationed at the system's edge. Dre already knew about the approaching fleet. He told me it was time I understood the full scope of what Command had prepared. When intelligence first suspected this treaty might be a trap, Fleet Command had done far more than prepare our delegation carefully. For 3 weeks, they had tracked Varith movements throughout the region, identifying exactly where reserves were likely stationed, and positioning our own forces accordingly along 3 separate approach vectors surrounding the system. Positions chosen specifically because they intersected the most likely paths any reinforcing fleet would need to travel to reach Meridian. I told him he had built a trap for their trap. He agreed with quiet satisfaction, if the ask. And Dancy truly intended to use overwhelming force to eliminate our delegation and hold the station permanently. They would need considerably more than the blockade we had already handled. Command had simply ensured that whatever additional force they required would find difficulty long before reaching this system. Roughly 2 hours later, Corin's systems picked up the first signs of engagement occurring along the approaching fleet's path considerably earlier than their expected arrival at our station. Communication remained limited given the distances involved, but the fragments we managed to intercept painted a clear picture of what was unfolding. Our concealed forces, having studied Varith patterns for weeks, executed a series of carefully coordinated maneuvers designed to fracture the approaching fleet's cohesion before it ever reached its intended destination. Rather than meeting their numerical advantage with direct confrontation, our ships focused on disrupting communication and coordination systems, using tactics refined over years of hard experience fighting against exactly this kind of overwhelming force. Another hour later, Dre contacted us again, his voice carrying clear satisfaction beneath its usual calm professionalism. He reported the fleet successfully intercepted and scattered. Their coordination system had suffered significant disruption during the engagement, forcing the majority of their remaining vessels to withdraw rather than continue toward Meridian Station. I asked about our own casualties. He told me they were minimal on our side since our tactics had focused primarily on disruption rather than direct confrontation exactly as intended. The Ascendancy fleet experienced considerably more significant losses, though he stressed that our forces made every reasonable effort to avoid unnecessary escalation beyond what the situation genuinely required. I thanked him and asked that he relay my gratitude to every soldier involved. He told me my own actions aboard the station had played a critical role in exposing the situation clearly enough for their preparation to matter. I returned to the negotiation chamber where Kesh waited with his advisors gathered nervously around him. He already seemed to sense what had happened. I told him we had considerably more to discuss now than we did even an hour earlier. He studied me with the particular look of an opponent finally understanding, without remaining doubt, exactly who they had underestimated. Later that day, I asked to speak with him privately, away from advisors and careful performance. He arrived looking nothing like the confident diplomat who had greeted us days earlier. I asked him directly whose plan this truly was, Was the treaty ever meant as a genuine path to peace, or was deception the intention from the very start? He was quiet for a long moment before answering honestly. He told me the ascendancy was not one unified voice, despite whatever impression our long history of conquest had given us. There were factions in deep disagreement over how this war should proceed. A minority faction genuinely believed the war had cost more than any conquest could justify and had argued for real peace for years. The treaty had been drafted honestly by that faction. But a separate, far more powerful faction had viewed this summit as an opportunity rather than a diplomatic effort. They saw the chance to gather our most valuable leadership into a single location as too tempting to ignore regardless of the treaty's original intent. He told me he had been placed in an impossible position. He believed genuinely in the terms we discussed, while knowing from the very beginning that forces beyond his control had been positioned around the station. I asked why he was telling me this now. He said our actions had already exposed the truth far beyond anything he could hide or deny. Two failed operations witnessed not only by our forces, but by every neutral observer present. Word of this would reach his home world within days, and it would not reflect well on those who had pushed for continued conflict. Over the following days, working closely with Dr. Solon, we compiled a full account of everything that had happened. Intercepted communications, the blockade, the failed reinforcement fleet, all documented alongside footage corroborated by neutral observers. I intended to make certain the truth reached every world watching this war, rather than allowing it to be denied or buried by whichever faction had built this trap. We transmitted the compiled evidence through multiple channels, simultaneously reaching not only our allies but neutral territories that maintained cautious relationships with the ascendancy. Within days, reports began circulating detailing the elaborate trap and its complete failure against our preparation. 4 days after our private conversation, Kesh requested an urgent meeting. He told me the governing council had convened an emergency session. The faction responsible for the reinforcement fleet had suffered real consequences. Several voices advocating continued aggression had been removed from positions of authority, while the peace faction had gained considerable influence as a direct result of this failure. He told me he now spoke with far more authority than when we first arrived. The council had authorized him to continue these discussions backed by genuine consensus, rather than competing factions working against one another. 20 years of war had taught me caution, and I did not intend to abandon it simply because circumstances now appeared to favor us. I told him we would continue carefully, honestly, and with full understanding of everything that had already occurred between us. Real peace, if it was genuinely possible, had to be built on exactly that kind of honesty, rather than the careful performance we had exchanged during our first days here. The negotiations that followed bore almost no resemblance to our first tense days aboard the station. Kesh arrived each morning without the elaborate ceremony that once accompanied his entrance. His advisors spoke with a directness that had been entirely absent before, as though the failure of their aggressive faction had finally given everyone permission to say what they actually meant. We spent nearly 2 weeks working through the real terms of what would become the true treaty between humanity and the Varith ascendancy. Slow, careful work. Long mornings over border definitions and resource agreements. Long afternoons reviewing draft language line by line with Dr. Solon, and Kesh's own legal advisors closing every gap that had once allowed vague wording to hide so much. I found something quietly satisfying in that tedious, unglamorous process. 20 years of war had taught me the value of a difficult peace built through genuine effort rather than empty promise. Every long afternoon spent arguing over a single clause felt like a small victory, proof that both sides genuinely intended for this agreement to mean something lasting rather than simply buying time. Nadia noticed one evening as we reviewed the day's progress together that I seemed different, less guarded, she said. During our first days here, she could see me cataloging every exit, every guard, every small detail that might matter if things went wrong. Now I seemed almost relaxed. I considered her observation carefully before answering. I admitted I supposed I was somewhat relaxed, though I did not think the caution ever fully disappears after everything we had lived through. I simply believed for the first time in a very long while that this particular danger had genuinely passed. She asked about the deeper danger, the larger war itself. I told her that remained to be seen, but I believed we had taken a genuine step toward ending it rather than simply surviving another chapter within it. I told Kesh near the end of our review that this document had to protect both our peoples equally. I had no interest in a peace that simply shifted advantage from his side to mine. I wanted something that genuinely lasted. He agreed completely and told me he now understood more clearly than ever why our species had proven so difficult to conquer. Because we never stop preparing, even when circumstances appear peaceful. Even when an invitation arrives dressed in warm, welcoming language, we still quietly consider what might go wrong and prepare for it anyway. I told him I would not call that strength alone. I would call it the lesson every difficult experience eventually teaches if you survive long enough to learn from it. We did not begin this war prepared for everything. We learned to become prepared one difficult loss at a time. By the end of the second week, the final treaty sat complete reviewed by both delegations alongside several neutral observers who had remained present throughout to ensure accountability on both sides. Where the original document had relied on vague, comfortable language, this final version specified everything clearly. Troop numbers verified through mutual inspection rather than simple trust. Every disputed territory clearly mapped with provisions for handling future disagreement through communication rather than conflict. The signing took place in the same chamber where our confrontation had first unfolded weeks earlier, though the room felt entirely different now. I addressed the gathered representatives once the signatures were complete. I told them that for 20 years our two peoples had known each other only through conflict, and that I would not pretend a single treaty, however carefully built, could erase everything both sides had lost. But I believed this document represented something worth protecting. Not peace built from weakness or naive trust, but peace built through honest understanding, careful preparation, and genuine respect between two peoples who had finally learned exactly what the other was truly capable of. Kesh spoke after me with a sincerity I had never heard from him during our first tense days together. He told the room that the ascendancy had approached this summit, divided though he had not understood the depth of that division until circumstances forced it into view. He believed humanity had taught his people something more valuable than the treaty terms themselves. That strength does not require domination. That preparation does not require aggression. That lasting peace, when genuinely pursued, proves considerably more valuable than any conquest achieved through continued conflict. As the ceremony ended, I stood once more near the wide viewing window where I had first noticed the concerning number of Varith vessels weeks earlier. The view outside had changed completely. Where dozens of warships had once gathered quietly positioning for a trap, none of us were meant to survive. Only a handful of vessels remained now present as legitimate escort rather than concealed threat. Nadia joined me at the window and asked whether I believed this peace would hold. I considered her question carefully before answering, thinking of everything we had learned throughout this long, difficult mission. The careful preparation before our departure. The hidden technology waiting quietly beneath our ship's decking. The disciplined restraint shown by Vale's team throughout every stage of our confrontation. The patient, honest work completed over these final 2 weeks, building something considerably stronger than the fragile document that had first summoned us here. I told her I believed it had a genuine chance, not because either side had become naive or trusting overnight, but because we had both learned exactly what the other was capable of in conflict and in genuine effort toward peace. That kind of honest understanding, earned through difficult experience, tends to last considerably longer than any agreement built on convenient assumption. She nodded slowly, understanding completely. She asked what we would do if it failed eventually, if some future crisis threatened to unravel everything we had built here. I smiled slightly, thinking of my grandfather's farm, and the strange colored sky, and everything that had followed throughout 20 long years of survival and growth. I told her we would do exactly what we had always done: prepare carefully, adapt quickly, face whatever came next with the same quiet determination that had carried us this far already. The quiet Accord departed Meridian Station several days later, beginning our long journey home. I stood at the observation deck watching the station shrink behind us, exactly as I had watched our home fleet shrink behind us weeks earlier. We had arrived uncertain, carrying hope, alongside careful preparation for whatever danger waited. We had found a trap built around the appearance of peace, and we had faced it not with unnecessary aggression, but with patient discipline earned through 20 difficult years of hard experience. We were returning home carrying something considerably more valuable than we had dared hope for when this journey began. Not a fragile ceasefire easily broken by whichever faction happened to hold power on a given day, but a genuine foundation for lasting peace built through honest confrontation, careful negotiation, and mutual respect, earned the difficult way, through experience rather than empty promise. I thought once more of my grandfather and everyone else who never lived to see this moment arrive. Their sacrifice through all those difficult years had finally led somewhere worth reaching. Humanity had been invited to a summit built as a trap. We had arrived prepared, patient, and determined, and in the end we walked away with something considerably more valuable than victory alone. We walked away with genuine peace built to last.